It's strange how fences, meant to divide, often draw people closer. Ours wasn't much. Just a few wooden planks weathered from years of sun and rain. It separated my house from Ethan and Mia's, but in reality, it separated nothing. We were two families intertwined, lives so blended it was hard to say where one ended and the other began. Ethan and Mia had moved in next door 5 years ago, bringing with them laughter, weekend barbecues, and countless hours of shared parenting. Their 2 kids, a boy and a girl, were close in age to ours, and together, they ran wild between our yards, tearing up the grass and making mud pies. Sarah, my wife, was particularly close to Mia. The 2 of them traded recipes, shared glasses of wine on warm summer nights, and seemed to know every detail of each other's lives. And Ethan? He and I were brothers in every sense of the word. He was my blood, my best friend, and the person I trusted most in the world. That's why I didn't think twice about the little things. The way Sarah would casually hop the fence to borrow sugar or chat with Ethan in his garage. How Mia would bring over cookies for the kids while I worked late shifts. We were a family, not 2 separate households, but one big, messy unit. The cracks, if there were any, were invisible to me. Life was good. Until one night it wasn't. It started with something small. A lingering glance, a poorly disguised joke at a barbecue. The kind you don't notice until later, when it keeps replaying in your head. I didn't even know why it stuck with me. Just a throwaway comment from Ethan about Sarah's cooking. But there was something in the way Sarah laughed, the way her cheeks flushed. I shook it off. I had to. But then, weeks later, I found myself home early from work. The kids were playing next door, and the house was unusually quiet. I remember standing in the kitchen, setting my bag down on the counter, and hearing voices outside. Low, hushed, and intimate. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, pushed me to the back door. The fence was right there, solid and unassuming as always. But just beyond it I could see them. Sarah, leaning against it, her posture casual, her smile coy, and Ethan, standing closer to her than he needed to, his hand brushing hers as they talked. I told myself it was nothing. I went inside, closed the door, and forced myself to think about dinner plans and the kids' school schedules. But that moment, that seemingly innocuous interaction, stayed with me. And slowly, I began to notice more. Sarah's laughter, bright and easy when Ethan was around, subdued when it was just the 2 of us. The way Ethan's gaze lingered a little too long when she spoke. The excuses Sarah made for disappearing, running errands, taking something next door, always when Mia was out with the kids. The fence wasn't a boundary anymore. It was a gateway. And yet I did nothing. I didn't confront her, didn't ask Ethan about it. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud, because saying them would make them real. But the thing about secrets is they don't stay buried. And ours was about to explode, tearing apart the very foundation of everything I thought I knew. The first undeniable clue came by accident, like most revelations do. It was a warm autumn afternoon, and Sarah had asked me to help fix a loose plank on the fence. I didn't think much of it. She was always finding little household projects to keep me busy. As I worked, I noticed her phone sitting on the patio table, buzzing with a flurry of notifications. I glanced over out of habit, not suspicion. The screen lit up with a text preview. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable. The air seemed to leave my lungs all at once. My hands, still gripping the hammer, went numb. It wasn't the message itself that made my stomach drop, but the name attached to it. Ethan. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was some kind of joke. Maybe someone had borrowed Ethan's phone. My mind scrambled for excuses as I sat down on the patio chair, staring at the phone like it might detonate. But I couldn't leave it alone. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and unlocked the screen. Sarah's passcode was the same as always, our wedding anniversary. A number I now realized she hadn't changed in years because she never expected me to look. The messages were there. Dozens of them. The tone shifted as I scrolled further back. What started as playful teasing, hidden in plain sight just like their interactions, had morphed into something darker, more intimate. There were mentions of secret rendezvous, inside jokes I didn't understand, and finally, explicit promises of love and desire. I sat frozen, my thoughts racing in every direction at once. There was a knock on the fence, the familiar rhythm Ethan always used when he wanted my attention. He appeared a moment later, holding a six-pack of beer, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. "Hey, you busy? Thought we could catch the game later." For a moment, I just stared at him, the hammer still clutched in one hand and Sarah's phone in the other. I wondered if he could see it on my face, if he knew that I knew. But if he did, he didn't show it. "Not today," I said finally, my voice flat. Ethan shrugged and left, the gate swinging shut behind him. I watched him go, my chest tightening with every step he took. How long had this been going on? How many times had he smiled at me like that, knowing what he was doing behind my back? That night, I couldn't bring myself to confront Sarah. I tried, but the words caught in my throat every time I thought about saying them. I stared at her across the dinner table, watching as she laughed at one of the kids' jokes, as if everything was normal. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I called Mia the next morning. I don't know what I expected when I dialed her number, but I knew I couldn't face this alone. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and cheerful, oblivious to what was about to happen. "We need to talk," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Mia was confused at first when I told her I needed to meet in person, but her curiosity outweighed her hesitation. We agreed to meet at a cafe a few miles from the neighborhood, far enough from prying eyes. When I arrived, Mia was already there, sipping a coffee and scrolling through her phone. She smiled when she saw me, but her expression quickly turned to concern as I sat down across from her. "What's wrong?" she asked, leaning forward. I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat, but I couldn't back out now. "It's about Ethan and Sarah." Her face didn't change at first, just a slight furrow of her brow as she processed my words. Then, like a crack spreading across glass, her composure shattered. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. For a moment the cafe seemed too loud. The clinking of cups and low hum of conversation around us felt surreal, like the world shouldn't keep moving while I was about to destroy someone else's. "I mean exactly what it sounds like," I said, trying to steady my voice. No, I know Ethan and Sarah are having an affair." Mia stared at me, her face blank with disbelief. "You're wrong," she said after a long pause, her voice firm but fragile, like she was trying to convince herself. "Ethan wouldn't do that. Sarah wouldn't do that. They're family." I wished she was right. I wanted nothing more than for her words to erase the texts, the memories, the uneasy moments I'd ignored for months. But the truth sat like a stone in my chest. "I found the messages, Mia," I said, lowering my voice but leaning in, forcing her to meet my eyes. "On Sarah's phone. It's not just texts, it's everything. They've been meeting, behind our backs, for months." Her expression crumpled like a paper being crushed. She leaned back in her chair, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "Messages?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "What kind of messages?" I hesitated. How could I explain? The flirtations, the shared plans, the explicit details that left no room for doubt. Saying it aloud felt like hammering the final nail into the coffin of our lives. "The kind you don't send unless—" I stopped myself, searching for a gentler way to say it, but there wasn't one. "They're sleeping together, Mia." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she tried to hold back tears. I didn't know what to do, whether to reach out, to stay silent, or to give her space. So I just sat there, letting the weight of my words settle between us. After a long, tense moment, she wiped her eyes and looked up at me. Her voice was brittle, but there was steel beneath the surface. "How long have you known?" "Not long. A couple of days," I admitted, I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Mia shook her head, her lips pressed into a tight line. I knew something was wrong. He's been distant, distracted. But I thought it was just work, or stress, or... She stopped, her voice catching. How could he do this? To me? To us? I don't know, I said, my own anger flaring again. But they didn't just hurt you, Mia. They tore apart everything we built, everything we trusted. For a moment we just sat there, two people bound by shared betrayal, staring at the broken pieces of our lives. Then Mia straightened, her expression hardening into something I hadn't seen before. We can't let them get away with this. I blinked, startled. What are you saying? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. If they're going to destroy us, Daniel, then we'll destroy them right back. After the conversation with Mia, the world seemed to shift. Everything around me felt sharper, harsher. The laughter of children playing in the yard next door grated on my nerves. The sound of Sarah humming in the kitchen made my stomach churn. Every moment felt tainted, like I was living in a house built on quicksand. Mia and I began to watch them more closely. Not in an obvious way, we didn't want to tip our hand, but in subtle, deliberate ways that revealed more than we wanted to know. Ethan's visits to our house, once frequent and casual, now seemed calculated. He would drop by when he knew Mia was running errands, offering to help Sarah with some small task or asking for a cup of coffee. Sarah, for her part, made excuses to leave the house more often. I'm just running over to Mia's to drop something off, she would say, or, Ethan needs help moving something in the garage. I watched her through the kitchen window one evening as she crossed the fence to Ethan's house. It was dark, but the porch light cast enough of a glow to see her knock softly on the door. A moment later, Ethan appeared, stepping out to meet her. They spoke in hushed tones before disappearing inside. My hands gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white as I stared at the empty yard. I didn't need to follow them to know what was happening. The fence, once a symbol of our closeness, had become a gateway to betrayal. Mia suggested we confront them together. It'll be harder for them to lie if we're both there, she reasoned. I wasn't so sure. The idea of seeing Ethan and Sarah in the same room, forced to answer for what they'd done, felt unbearable. But I couldn't deny the logic. So we planned it carefully. A Sunday afternoon, when both families were home and the kids were playing outside. Mia invited Ethan over under the pretense of discussing vacation plans, while Sarah busied herself in the kitchen. When we all sat down at the dining table, the tension was so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. Something's been on my mind, Mia began, her voice calm but edged with ice. She glanced at me, then back at Ethan. And I think it's time we talk about it. All of us. Sarah frowned, setting down her glass of water. What's this about? Ethan leaned back in his chair, his smile faltering. Yeah, what's going on? I took a deep breath, my gaze locked on my brother. We know. The room went still. Mia and I watched as understanding flickered across their faces, followed quickly by panic. What are you talking about? Sarah said, her voice trembling. Mia didn't hesitate. We know about the affair. We know what you've been doing. Behind our backs. Behind this fence. Ethan's face turned pale. Mia, Don't, she snapped, cutting him off. Don't you dare lie to me. For a moment no one spoke. The air seemed to crackle with tension as we waited for them to respond. Finally, Sarah broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not what you think, she said. Mia laughed bitterly. It's exactly what I think. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising. You're making something out of nothing. Nothing? I shot back, my anger boiling over. I saw the messages, Ethan. I know everything. How long has this been going on? Months? A year? Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sarah, too, sat frozen, her face pale. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. Ethan stared at the table, his jaw clenched, while Sarah's face crumpled into a mask of guilt and fear. Finally, Mia spoke, her voice icy and deliberate. "Say it, Ethan. Admit it. You owe us that much." Ethan's eyes darted towards Sarah, who sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap. He hesitated for a long moment, then exhaled deeply, the fight draining out of him. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's true. We've been seeing each other." Mia let out a sharp, bitter laugh that cut through the room. "Seeing each other? That's what you call it." Ethan's head snapped up, his gaze hardening. "What do you want me to say, Mia? That I'm a horrible person? That I made a mistake? Is that what you want to hear?" Mia leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "What I want is for you to explain to me how you could look me in the eyes every day, sleep in the same bed as me, and still do this. I want to know what I ever did to deserve this betrayal." Sarah broke then, tears spilling down her cheeks as she finally found her voice. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone. It just happened." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed Mia's earlier tone. "It just happened? That's your excuse? Months of sneaking around, of lying to both of us. And you're going to blame it on some cosmic accident?" Sarah turned to me, her face streaked with tears. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you do it?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Why, Ethan? My own brother." She flinched as though I'd slapped her. "I don't know," she said helplessly. I don't know." Mia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't know? That's your answer." She shook her head, disgust written all over her face. "Unbelievable." Ethan stood too, reaching for Mia's arm, but she yanked it away. "Mia, please, don't you dare touch me," she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "Don't you dare." The kids' laughter outside drifted faintly through the window, a cruel reminder of the world continuing as normal while ours shattered into pieces. I stood slowly, my gaze fixed on Ethan. "You don't get to walk away from this clean," I said, my voice low but steady. "Neither of you do." Ethan squared his shoulders, his expression hardening into something almost defiant. "You don't understand." "No, I do understand," I interrupted, stepping closer. "I understand that you're a selfish, cowardly bastard who betrayed not just me, but your wife, your kids, and everything this family stood for." Ethan's nostrils flared, but he said nothing. Mia took a step back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You can have each other," she said coldly, her voice laced with venom, "because after this, neither of you will have us." As the confrontation ended, Ethan and Sarah left in separate directions, both too stunned or ashamed to argue further. Mia and I were left standing in the aftermath, the house unnervingly quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. Mia turned to me, her expression a mix of anger and heartbreak. "We can't stay here," she said. "Not with them next door." I nodded, knowing she was right. The fence that had once been a bridge between our lives was now a glaring symbol of everything that had gone wrong. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice heavy with exhaustion. Mia's lips pressed into a thin line. "We take control of the situation, before they get a chance to." "How?" She hesitated for a moment, then met my eyes. "We make them face the consequences, and we do it together. From here, the story will deepen with the fallout. Navigating family drama, public backlash, the children's reactions, and the slow but transformative alliance between Daniel and Mia as they rebuild their lives while dealing with Ethan and Sarah's audacity. Let me know how you'd like the next parts to unfold. The days after the confrontation were chaos. A whirlwind of anger, confusion, and icy silence. Sarah stayed in our house but avoided me at all costs. Her attempts at apologies half-hearted and riddled with excuses. Ethan disappeared for a while, crashing at a friend's place. But his absence only made the tension between our houses heavier. Mia and I started talking more long, late-night conversations that were a mix of strategy and shared grief. She told me about little signs she had ignored, moments that didn't add up. Ethan working late, his phone always turned face down. Excuses that now felt like insults to her intelligence. "We were idiots," she said one night as we sat on my back porch, staring at the fence that separated us. "How could we have been so blind?" "It wasn't blindness," I said, feeling the bitter truth settle on my tongue. "We trusted them. That's what makes it hurt so much." But our conversations weren't just about venting. Mia was determined to find out everything Ethan and Sarah had been hiding. She started digging, combing through phone records, emails, and even credit card bills. And what she found left us both reeling. Ethan had been using family money, some of Mia's savings, to fund secret getaways with Sarah. Weekend trips, expensive gifts, even a hotel just a few miles away from home. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial. When Mia showed me the evidence, I felt a fresh wave of anger. But there was something else too. A sense of clarity. "They can't just walk away from this," I said. Mia's lips tightened into a grim smile. "No, they can't." The neighborhood was no longer a haven. Friends and neighbors, once close to both families, began to whisper about the cracks in our seemingly perfect lives. The kids, oblivious to the full truth, started to pick up on the tension. One evening, Ethan came back to retrieve some things from his house. I was in the yard when he arrived, and our eyes met across the fence. He hesitated, then walked over. "We need to talk," he said. I laughed bitterly. "Now you want to talk? After everything?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his face etched with frustration. "You don't get it, do you? It's not that simple. Sarah and I." "You what?" I snapped, stepping closer. "You fell in love? Is that what you're going to say?" "Spare me, Ethan." His jaw tightened. "I didn't plan for this to happen, okay? It did." I wanted to hit him. Every muscle in my body tensed with the urge, but I held back, my voice cold and steady. "You planned every lie. Every time you smiled at me knowing what you were doing. Don't stand there and act like this was some accident." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Mia's voice cut through the tension. She had come outside, her expression like steel. "Get your things and leave," she said to Ethan, her tone icy. "And don't you dare show your face here unless it's to explain to your children why their father's a liar." Ethan left without another word. The hardest part came when the kids started asking questions. They were too young to understand everything, but old enough to sense that something was deeply wrong. "Why doesn't Uncle Ethan come over anymore?" my youngest asked one evening, her big eyes filled with confusion. "And why are you and Mom always so quiet?" I struggled for an answer, hating the weight of the truth. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said finally. "Big ones. And it takes time to figure things out." Mia faced similar questions from her kids, but she was blunter than I was. She told them that their father had broken their family's trust, but she made sure they knew it wasn't their fault. Still, the tension between the houses grew unbearable. The kids, once inseparable, started to drift apart, caught in the storm their parents had created. One evening, Mia and I decided to sit down together with our children. We didn't share all the details, but we explained enough for them to understand that things would be different. But something surprising happened. The kids didn't seem angry at us, they were angry at Ethan and Sarah. "They don't care about us," Mia's oldest said, her voice trembling with frustration. "They only care about themselves." Hearing those words from a child was like a knife to the heart, but it also strengthened our resolve. "We'll fix this," Mia said. reaching for my hand. And for the first time, I believed her. A week later, Sarah came to me, her eyes red from crying. She stood on the porch, wringing her hands as though she couldn't figure out where to start. "Can we talk?" she asked. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I wanted something different, but I was wrong. I ruined everything, Daniel, and I don't know how to fix it." Her tears didn't move me. I felt only the faintest flicker of pity. "You didn't just ruin us," I said coldly. "You ruined 2 families. And you think an apology is enough to fix that?" She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "I love you," she whispered. "No, you don't," I said. "You love yourself, and now you're just afraid of being alone." Mia and I started spending more time together, not just as allies but as something more. There was a warmth between us, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. One evening, as the kids played in the yard, she turned to me and smiled. "Maybe this is our chance," she said softly. "Our chance for what?" "To build something better," she replied. Months later, the dust began to settle. Ethan and Sarah had moved in together, though their relationship seemed more strained than ever. Mia and I, on the other hand, had started to build a life together, not out of revenge, but out of a shared hope for something new. The fence still stood between our houses, but it no longer felt like a wall. It was a reminder of everything we'd been through, and everything we'd survived. As I watched Mia laughing with the kids one evening, I realized something. Betrayal had torn our lives apart, but it had also given us the chance to start over, to rebuild, to find happiness in the most unexpected of places. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again.